morning. We are now alive. I'd like to call this meeting to order for January 20th, 2026 special meeting of Council. Madam Clerk, for the record of this meeting, please note Councillors Carruthers and Crone are absent with notice, and Councillor Roy DeClemente has advised she will be joining us later this morning. We're on item B, that's a declaration of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from council? Not seeing any. I will move along to item C. I will share our land acknowledgement statement. The town of East Gwillimbury recognizes and acknowledges the lands originally used and occupied by the First Peoples of the Williams Treaty First Nations and other Indigenous peoples, and on behalf of Council, I thank them for sharing this land. We also acknowledge the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation as East Gwillimbury's closest First Nation community and recognize the unique relationship the Chippewas have with the lands and the waters of this territory. They are the water protectors and environmental steward of these lands, and we join them in these responsibilities. We're at item D in our deputations. There are no deputations today.
Madam Mayor, if I could just jump in on the deputation item before you continue, if you wouldn't mind.
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I actually, since the last meeting, I've sketched out a couple notes that I just wanted to bring forward for the public record, because at the previous meeting, there was a motion seeking clarity around the procedural bylaw on deputations. And so, as you noted, there are no deputations today in the agenda. But for both council and the public, are we notified if any have been removed? Is that on the record? So going forward, does the administration record if any deputations have been removed for public transparency? So if the deputation is removed, I'm assuming it was staff, because it wouldn't be obviously council that's removing it. So to that end, like, what are the specific criteria for determining that removal? And if it's deemed necessary to remove the deputation, when that's communicated back to the deputant, are they given the opportunity to amend it, to then represent it? And then further, if not, is there an appeals process to the decision to not allow them to speak? And I made all these notes because I simply wanted to bring the comments forward on the public record to seek clarity. I'm wondering if perhaps a memo could be circulated from staff, or we even have a special education seminar that we're sitting here today. Perhaps once all the kind of guidelines or guardrails are put in place, perhaps we could have a special education seminar so that we as council could know, but also the public could know as well. So thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank
you. I'm going to refer this item to staff, if I could. Mr. Felczyk?
Madam Mayor, I just want to maybe check with the clerk. I don't know what the clerk's preference is to provide any comments in response now, or prefer to bring back a memo. Either way, we can certainly provide clarification, but I'm just wondering if the clerk has a preference. Maybe could just help us out.
Through you, Madam Mayor, our team is actively working on the protocol that will accompany the resolution that was approved by council. Part of that plan is to share that protocol with members of council, and certainly that can be accommodated through a memo that will be shared. Again, actively we're working on it, and we will provide further clarity on that. In terms of the recommendation that was approved by council, I just wanted to flag that council still retains the authority to decide if they wish to hear somebody or not to hear that. That authority has not been delegated to staff to make that determination. That will still reside with council to make that determination. So the protocol will simply outline all of the new requirements, namely the submission of the written outline of a deputation that was proposed to be done by Monday at noon. So again, the focus is just to make sure that we can relay that to individuals that have an interest in making a deputation, and council is the sole body with the discretion to make a decision on whether or not they consent to hear a deputation.
Wonderful. Thank you sincerely, and thank you, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Leahy, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. I had one question with relation to my fellow councillor's request, and I'm happy to hear that you are following up with some more details about the protocol for both councillors as well as residents. So one question which I would like to respectfully request that staff include in the protocols is, what are the protocols around if a deputant withdraws their deputation, and they do that before their time when they were originally scheduled. At what point, in terms of timing, does the clerk's office issue a revised agenda? Because I believe in the past we received revised agendas before the council meetings, and so I'm wondering around the protocols around that specifically to be included in your memo. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for that, Councillor Lee. That's been noted.
Thank you. We are at item E for our workshop. Today's workshop begins with a zoning bylaw conformity update presentation. And I am going to refer this item to staff, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. I'm very pleased today to introduce, and I believe you've already met, the consultant team who is doing the work with respect to the zoning bylaw conformity of Aaron Butler and Jesse Ospich, who are in the audience today. We're at a really critical timing of the zoning bylaw conformity. We're about to start and conclude phase 2. We'll be starting to have public meetings and community meetings, I should say, not statutory public meetings. And this is a perfect opportunity for members of council to become familiar of where we're at, next steps, and some of the issues that we will be looking at and seeking both your feedback, but also members of the community feedback. So I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Butler, who will do the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Good to see everyone again. This Jesse Ospitz is just a few rows behind me here, who's available for questions as well, any technical matters that might come up from our workshop today. So as was mentioned, I'm Aaron Butler. I'm managing partner at NPG. And last time we were here was June of last year. We were here for a council meeting. We had an open house with the public, 2 sessions, and we met with staff and other interested parties at that time as well. We'll touch on some of the things we heard that day today. And as was mentioned, really today is about providing council with an update on the status of the project and some preliminary findings that we'd like feedback on. Next slide, please. So why is this project taking place? So as a reminder, the zoning bylaw update is a legislative requirement. The bylaw must be updated for conformity within 3 years of the official plan being approved according to the Planning Act. Your official plan was sent to the province for review in November 2025. Now that the region no longer has planning authority, the province is the approval authority. So the zoning bylaw will align with the new official plan. We've been working closely with the new official plan document. And that new official plan will align with all recent provincial policy changes. In addition, the zoning bylaw will also be updated to align with certain regulations that have been amended by the province recently, which I'll go into some detail on today. We're also reviewing the bylaw for other updates highlighted throughout the consultation and through our best practices review, including our review of recent zoning bylaw amendments and recent minor variance applications to see some trends through there. So we'll touch on that today as well. Next slide, please. So project timeline, we're sort of in the end of phase 2 here that you can see highlighted. This is what we call research and analysis. This includes the project's background report and technical briefs. We'll be back in a couple of weeks on February 3rd for additional consultation on these documents, including a public open house, meeting with interested parties, and meeting with staff. This round of consultations to get feedback on the background report and technical briefs. Phase 3, which is really, we're kind of at the beginning of phase 3 here, end of phase 2, which we call building and engage, is the actual drafting of the bylaw and schedules, and that will carry through Q3 of next year. Final edits are being made right now as we speak to the background report and technical briefs, and those will be released very shortly for consumption at the open houses in a couple of weeks. Next slide, please. We have some project milestones here looking forward, phase 2 through phase 4 to the end of the project. Just to focus on phase 2 today and explain a little bit more about what our background report is and what the technical briefs do. The background report reviews the provincial policies that have changed. We'll review the new official plan. It highlights how those documents and how regulation changes that have been made at the province, how those documents will impact the zoning bylaw. It also highlights trends we're seeing, as I mentioned, in town and across the province. From there, we've produced what's called technical briefs, where we go through in detail each section of the zoning bylaw and essentially start to land and start to have some discussion around potential changes and direction for the zoning bylaw update, section by section. Next slide, please. In this slide, I want to touch on a few pieces of key provincial legislation that are influencing changes to the zoning bylaw and the updates to the zoning bylaw, which we've identified in our background report. Bill 23, which you're familiar with, mandates that up to 3 additional residential units, or ARUs, are permitted on any parcel of urban residential land. So that's service land within a settlement area, on water sanitary services. The zoning bylaw will address this component to permit up to 3 ARUs on urban service land. Bill 17 and OREG 25725, which I know you're also familiar with, permits as of right variations to building setbacks, again, only for urban residential lands, that's service land within a settlement area. There are certain exceptions to that. And so we're reviewing that, and the bylaw will address this. And lastly, one we wanted to mention is Bill 97. This is from 2023, but has a particular component to it that needs to be addressed in the zoning bylaw. And that is that standalone retail uses and standalone office uses are no longer permitted in employment areas. And that's a mandate from the province to basically protect what are identified as employment areas for uses like manufacturing, warehousing, R&D for those uses. It does permit ancillary, say office, ancillary retail uses to the principal use on the property. So that's something that we are looking at. We're reviewing the employment zones in the bylaw, reviewing the permitted uses, and coming up with zones and uses that comply with the Planning Act as amended by Bill 97. Next slide, please. So just to touch on some of the things we heard through our first round of consultation, we heard from the building community that largely existing zone standards, so existing kind of typical residential zone standards, are mostly work well for them, and that the preference is to mainly leave those alone. We're looking at that comment. We did hear that there might need to be some flexibility and potentially even some new zones, especially within with the complete community secondary plan and in some of your other nodes for higher density and certain standards around higher density zones. We heard that parking standards, in particular for industrial uses, community members thought that they were kind of out of date, which they may be, and require examination. We heard from the interested parties group that there are frequent variances sought for parking related to ARUs. And so we looked at that in particular, and I'm going to touch on that in a slide or two. In conjunction with that comment, we heard that landscaping requirements need to be reviewed carefully in order to maintain kind of a streetscape and leave permeable space on a lot for rainwater and places for that to go. So we're looking at those two comments kind of side by side. And lastly, we also heard that this exercise should include kind of an update to implement the recent Complete Communities secondary plan. And we'll certainly be doing that. Next slide, please. I mentioned that we did a review of recent zoning bylaw amendments. So we looked back to 2020. We had 17 zoning bylaw amendments reviewed. The main takeaway for us was that most zoning bylaw amendments were for new development sites that kind of needed a rezoning, needed a zone change and probably some specific regulations for uses and or provisions, regulations. So they were mostly for new development. There weren't really any obvious trends that were picked out with respect to zoning bylaw amendments that would lead us to a change in the zoning bylaw. But what was more interesting is where we saw some committee of adjustment applications, and we can go to that on the next slide. So our review of minor variance applications over the same period from 2020 to today, as I said, was more interesting. And we did see some clear trends, some common variances that were sought for and that were approved. The first three listed here, so 5.2.4, 5.2.6, and 5.4G, they all deal with parking and driveways in residential areas and residential properties. And these sections of the bylaw were applied for variances very often for additional residential units. So it was mostly in relation to someone coming in for a building permit for an ARU in their dwelling, and essentially there wasn't space on their property to fit the extra parking space required for the ARU and still meet those three sections of the bylaw. So that was dealing with width of the driveway, the size of the actual parking space, and obstruction of the parking space next to other things on the lot, like another parked vehicle. So the configuration that was applied for most often to the Committee of Adjustment was sort of, you have your typical case with a car in the driveway and one car in the garage, and that meets the requirements of the 2 parking spaces for the main dwelling. And then the additional parking space most often was applied for kind of as a parallel spot in front of the dwelling or in front of the porch or the steps, parallel to the street. Sometimes you'd have a perpendicular arrangement too. So we're looking at those sections of the bylaw. We're looking at the variance decisions to determine what is the solution there for, especially for ARUs, for parking, for the parking standard with respect to the number required, the size, where they can be located on the lot, and permitted in tandem and this obstruction piece. So we're looking at that closely, and there was definitely interest at the interested parties workshops that we heard this was something to look at. The next common variance was to section 4.2.2, and this deals with accessory building heights and accessory building setbacks. So variances to those provisions in general for accessory buildings. And we'll be looking closely at that with staff to determine if there are changes that need to be made to those provisions, and whether that's kind of across the town or just in specific zones. And lastly, the next common variance we saw is categorized kind of as just residential building setbacks. So yard setbacks, whether that's side, front, rear, to a residential dwelling. That was the next common. Next slide, please. So we've put here kind of a preliminary list of, it's a summary of potential changes that will be discussed in the technical briefs, and we'll be seeking input on. These will probably be front and center at our consultation, looking for specific feedback on these items. So the first, additional residential units, ARUs, as I mentioned, 3 to be permitted as of right. I touched on the areas of employment a few slides ago, so this is again looking at areas of employment zones and permitted uses in those zones. I mentioned the complete community secondary plan to bring the policies from that plan into the zoning bylaw. Increasing use permissions where appropriate. This is really looking at several different zones from residential to institutional to commercial to agricultural even, looking at the use permissions within those zones and are they consistent with your new official plan? Do different uses need to be permitted or taken out to be consistent with the official plan or conform with the official plan? Parking and loading standards in general are going to be looked at and their ratios. We do see some need for specific changes there and an examination of the parking ratios. I mentioned ARUs being one. Schools, permitting schools on all parcels of urban residential land. This is another new mandate from the province that will be brought into the zoning bylaw. Another thing we're reviewing are the zoning of lands that are mapped as key natural heritage features and key hydrologic features in the Oak Ridges Moraine. And that's our look at that is to ensure that the zoning aligns with what is allowed in those areas under provincial plans and regulations. We've identified some gaps there. We're also looking at some zone naming and zone labels in the Oak Ridges Moraine area to better align with kind of the purpose of what the zone is. There's a couple of kind of inconsistencies with some zone titles and labels in those areas. We're looking at various updates to definitions in the zoning bylaw, which are kind of largely technical issues. We see that general provisions for ag-related uses and on-farm diversified uses can be updated to better align with provincial policies and guidelines that are kind of more recent than your zoning bylaw. And lastly, just kind of updating various other zone requirements within the bylaw. We have an example here, floor space index for townhouses and apartment buildings. That's kind of another theme and some things that the development industry in particular could be interested in. Next slide, please. So in addition to those, the review of those potential changes, we have identified a few new zones that are going to be required. This first one is a kind of a new or modified employment zone. I've mentioned this, but it's to bring the bylaw into conformity with the Planning Act and PPS around areas of employment. We see probably a new zone or modified zone coming in to align with the mixed business employment designation of the official plan, which is not an area of employment, but there's a need to kind of modify that zone or bring in potentially a new zone that aligns with that designation in particular. We will have several new mixed-use zones, which are implementing policies of the complete communities secondary plan. And lastly, a new zone for certain Oak Ridge Moraine lands that are prime agricultural areas as well, which actually may permit ag-related uses and on-farm diversified uses. And next slide, please, for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Johns, go ahead, please.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I appreciated the presentation and the slide breakdown. It's interesting when you talk about Bill 23 and the province's direction with the ADUs on parcels of urban residential land. I understand the premise in which the province is looking to deliver the intensification, but I think in East Gwillimbury's, when taking a look at East Gwillimbury and you see the areas of intensification and you're already seeing parking being filled on driveways and parking, quite frankly, parking on people's lawns, even though they would look to clean that up with, say, interlock or whatnot. The reality is that there's already overflow happening there, and I recognize the study that the work that needs to go in to better understand that. But when you look at East Gwillimbury and the opportunity that exists within the rural area, I really do think that this council has an opportunity to table and have a reasonable discussion with the province to look at ADUs within rural areas. I think that there's multi-generational families that are having to move out and then thus looking to move to an urban center when there is already area and space that does exist for families to be able to grow in an area where parking is an issue and quality of life is one that they very much cherish and value in living in that area. And the other thing is too is that when we're looking at the opportunity for additional housing and diversified housing, some of these ADUs could be used for housing security for those that are looking to rent, and then the side benefit is obviously the income. And so I think at some point it is important, whether it be now or later, but I do believe that the opportunity for council to have a reasonable discussion on advocating to the province regarding ADUs on those lands in rural areas and not simply in urban residential land parcels that already exist and they're already intensified. I think that it is very reasonable for us to have a discussion as a municipality, being East Gwillimbury, with the urban centers and the rural areas. And so I just wanted to bring that comment forward.
Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, I can touch on the comment. It's a great comment. So your zoning bylaw right now allows for 1 ARU. The province mandates you have to allow 3 on these urban residential lands. And again, that's service lands. So you have settlement areas that aren't on municipal services. So the province doesn't mandate that you do that there, but you may, and we would look to your official plan, to the policies there on will they be permitted in those areas, or more will they permit in those areas. Beyond that, your point on outside of the settlement areas, we'll be looking to the provincial planning statement, Oak Ridges Moraine, Greenbelt, for the policy guidance for your different categories of agricultural uses. They're permitted in certain agricultural areas, and they're permitted within accessory buildings within certain agricultural areas. So perhaps what we could do for the next round of consultation in a couple of weeks is have something specific on this, because this is an interesting point with a breakdown of kind of the rules by category, where they're allowed by policy and where they're not. Might be a good way to kick off the conversation on that.
And Madam Mayor, if I may just add to Aaron's comment, I think in our discussions with the province on the official plan, some of these very issues are really good for me to hear and for the staff team to hear, because at some point in the future, the province is going to be looking at the Greenbelt Review. And it's these type of questions, well, perhaps not exactly pertinent to the zoning bylaw, at a policy level, need to be discussed and have that dialogue, because East Gwillimbury is not Markham, it's not Vaughan, it's not Toronto. So different policy frameworks need to be considered.
Councillor Leahy.
Thank you very much, through you, Madam Mayor. I really appreciate the presentation. I think it's very timely for both residents and councillors, because there are significant changes that will affect our future and the shape of our communities moving forward. And especially with the new proposals for the different zonings, including the new mixed business employment designation. And so I'm wondering if you could provide a few more details about that new mixed business employment designation and how that would be uniquely affecting East Gwillimbury, because I can already imagine all kinds of questions. We want to be promoting employment, we want to be promoting business investment, and so I can see already that there'll be potentially lots of conflict or complications around that new mixed business zoning designation.
Madam Mayor, if it's okay, I'll have Jesse come up and speak to that one.
Thank you.
Thank you, through Madam Mayor. The intent for that designation is to essentially come up with a new zoning category. We would look at the permitted uses that are contemplated within the town's draft official plan and see how to best implement those. But to summarize, the idea is to come up with a new zoning category specifically for the mixed business employment designation. I'd like to point out that of the employment area designations that the draft official plan has identified, that is the only one that's not identified as an area of employment as defined under the Planning Act. So it does lend way to various uses as the town sees fit.
Thank you very much for that clarification.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. My question was just largely answered with the mixed business zoning, but I did want to kind of weigh in on where Councillor Johns was going with the ongoing parking issues. I just think it's worth mentioning, that numerous times in the last this term and the last term of council, we have spoke about parking issues, specifically in residential areas. And I think staff had told us that they were working on some new innovative ideas to try and squeak out a few parking spaces here and there wherever they could. And I don't think we've actually seen a report on that. It would be nice to see that, but I think it fits in nicely with what you're talking about there. So the mixed business zoning stuff, I was thinking more along the lines of no retail type stuff, and I think that has to do with possibly the size of the employment area. And I'm thinking, the larger the employment area, the more need there might be for some standalone business in that area. Saves traffic, people going out for lunch or going to a convenience store, whatever it might be. So I'm just wondering if that's going to fall in with your mixed business zoning.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it certainly could. Sometimes the amount of ancillary uses is tied directly to the size of the principal use kind of idea. So that's certainly part of the regulations we'd be looking at.
Ms. Conti.
Through you, Madam Mayor, just to follow up on the parking matter, we have a report that's coming to council at the end of February on that update.
Are there any other questions from members of council? Councillor Roy DeClemente.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I apologize if this has already been asked. The accessory dwelling units, we're looking at timelines of having this new zoning bylaw not being in effect until Q2 2027. The province is allowing it as of right now. I'm just wondering what we're doing in the interim, and so it's not necessarily a question for you, sir, but for staff. Through you, Madam Mayor, just wondering what we're doing in the interim, given that there are people out there who may be wanting to put an application in between now and then. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, and through you, Madam Mayor. So I believe Aaron touched upon the fact that it is a permitted, as of right, use presently within the urban area. So that is something that, although our zoning bylaw has not been updated, we do and must permit within the urban residential areas where they, wherever we have service lands and that is requested.
So if I may, Madam Mayor, through you to Mr. Krupnik, so if someone were to come in with an application because they wanted to put a garden suite and all of the parking and setbacks and all of those things were met, would they have to make a zoning bylaw amendment application? Or would we simply allow it as of right? Like, I'm trying to understand if they would have to apply and pay fees in order to change our current bylaws in order to make this happen.
Thank you. And through you, Madam Mayor, certainly an ARU, if it's resides within a facility outside of the primary dwelling, would still have to meet the setbacks within that zoning category, as it would in the future when it is. But some of those setback categories may change or may alter, or may be reduced, for instance, to accommodate an ARU. But certainly those still must be abided by.
Thank you. I guess that's what my question is if we haven't established what those rules are, how are we handling the applications that come in if we don't know what those setbacks or parking requirements or paving over all of those issues? If we don't know what what the rules are going to be, how are we able to approve something that's allowed as of right if we don't have the rules in order to enforce them?
Yes, and through you, Madam Mayor, presently we do see some interest, certainly within the for an ARU within a home, and that's typically where we're seeing it, not within an accessory structure itself, but within the home itself. And I believe our zoning bylaw does require a parking space for that ARU presently. In the past, the province had legislation where you had to, I believe you had to have a parking spot. You shall have a parking spot for each ARU. Presently, that is a may. So the town can choose, I believe, to reduce that requirement in the future through our zoning bylaw conformity update.
Through Madam Mayor, perhaps I can also add, I appreciate the concern and certainly the dialogue that's happening today. And one of the items that the staff team and myself are discussing is the timing. I appreciate that the zoning bylaw will not be brought forward for final adoption until after the official plan is approved. And despite our targeted timeline, that targeted timeline to a certain extent is out of our control because it'll be subject to the province approving it. And one can never count on that's going to happen on a particular day, a particular time. So just as recently as last night, the team and I were discussing, is this something that is worthwhile us pulling out? Because we don't necessarily need the OP conformity exercise, a new OP to be approved. So staff and myself and the team, the consultant team, will have a discussion about this, because if I think it is worthwhile pulling it out to address the clarity sooner than later, then we will make that recommendation.
Madam Mayor, if I can just clarify one thing, probably the terminology I was using around ARUs, that it's 3 units total on a piece of residential land. So your one principal dwelling, and it's 2 beyond that. So 3, the number 3 is for 3 units total on the property.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? I'm not seeing any. Could I have a mover and seconder to receive, please? Councillor Foster. Councillor Johnson. Thank you. All those in favor? And that's carried.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Leahy, I understand you have your hand up.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I was just approving, so
Thank
I
you.
raised it to approve. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to item number 2. Thinking Green Development Standards Project Update Presentation, and I'm going to refer this item to staff. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. Today, we have with us Gabriela Calapos, Executive Director of the Climate Action Partnership. This is the organization we're working with to advance the Thinking Green Development Standards. I'd like to acknowledge the work of Chris Ross, Manager of Environmental Initiatives, and Jack Krubnik, Director of Planning, Policy and Growth Management, who continue to provide leadership on the development of these standards. Last year, we worked on Phase 1, which involved an environmental scan and guiding principles for the next stage. Phase 2 involves the complete update of the metrics and community consultation, including consultation with the developer community and, of course, council. This presentation marks the beginning of that consultation period.
Sorry, just bear with us as we turn. It's not, it's on.
Is that right? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me time to update you on the Thinking Green Development Standards and input on the consultations that have taken place, the input we have received, as well as just an update in terms of provincial legislation and what that could possibly mean for Thinking Green Development Standards moving forward. So I just wanted to thank you very much for allowing us time to bring you an update. Next slide, please. So as you know, East Gwillimbury has been a lead in Thinking Green Development Standards. You were actually one of the first municipalities that advanced a green standard with requiring Energy Star for new residential development. And I think that was in 2006, and then Toronto came on with their green standard in 2008. And since then, there's about 14 municipalities that have green standards in place. And there's many others working on development of their green standard as well. So we often, when we think about what green standards are, a lot of times we get caught up in the energy and emissions metric inside the building. But I did want to kind of highlight, while that's a very, very important metric, it's definitely not the only metric that green standards advance. There's a variety of different components to green standards that look, yes, at the energy and emissions that come from the building, but in addition, looking at bird-friendly design, looking at how much precipitation is dealt with on site, looking at, with regards to how much green space is attached to around the community, looking at active transportation and how that is integrated into the community planning as a whole. So I did want to kind of highlight, there's a variety of metrics that green standards bring all into one place to really provide clarity to the development community on the metrics and the sustainability metrics that the municipality wants to see greater uptake on. So next slide, please. So as I was mentioning, we have a number of municipalities advancing green standards or using green standards as a mechanism to try and advance the sustainability of their new developments. It does only speak to new developments. It doesn't speak to existing developments. So I did want to kind of provide that clarity as well. And there is a variety of different forms that the green standards have taken. The leading practice thus far, and next slide, please. The leading practice thus far is really trying to advance the performance-based metrics, but then also requiring a mandatory tier that all developers must adhere to, but then providing clarity to the development community on where the municipality wants to go over a period of time. And that then enables great hope for uptake on the voluntary metrics, but also clarity to the development community for the capacity that they need to be developing in order to be ready for the next tier updates when they do happen. So as you can see, in terms of East Gwillimbury's timeline, There's been, with the Thinking Green Development Standard in 2012, and then the update that took place in terms of advancing it in 2018, and then now updating it as a result of the mandate from Council to update the Thinking Green Development Standard. We have done internal consultations with each of the departments that would be involved in the Thinking Green Development Standard, and I'll report back in terms of what we heard as well. But we are planning on going out for public consultation in February time period to gather input from the development community, from other neighboring municipalities, from conservation authorities, and then the general public as well. So next slide, please. So as I was mentioning, the leading practice that has emerged on development standards is the tiered mandatory process. That is definitely what we have tracked that has been getting the highest uptake from the development community. So we are recommending that this is the direction that East Gwillimbury go in as well. I will kind of speak to some of the caveats and plan Bs based on what we have to do, based on provincial information as that becomes available to us. But this is the general leading practice that municipalities are putting in place. Many of the municipalities with point-based systems are moving towards this, moving towards this system. And because of the evaluation that took place, finding that this is the system that has been able to secure the highest level of uptake from the development community. And the clarity it provides the development community for Tier 2 and Tier 3 for where the direction is going. So next slide, please. So just an update in terms of what would be under the umbrella of the Thinking Green Development Standard, and it would be not only for site plan, but it would also be for draft plan of subdivision. It would be for low-rise development, so type 3 as well, part 9 as well as part 3 in terms of multi-unit residential. It would also be aligned with the commercial institutional development and the industrial development. So it covers all of those development types. Next slide, please. And in terms of the Thinking Green Development Standard, one of the critical things that we did as part of this kind of analysis across the team is really looking at how do we identify what metrics are most important to the priorities of East Gwillimbury, while also matching those to try and advance consistency across green development standards in place in municipalities in Ontario. So as part of that exercise, there's 3 different themes for the metrics themselves, with the metrics under each of these themes identified. And this is an exercise that has taken place as a result of the input that was received from staff and also looking in terms of the consistency across green development standards and municipalities. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, but I didn't want to go into too much detail on the metrics themselves. I wanted to spend more time on the input that we received for the consultations that have taken place. Next slide, please. So as part of the internal consultations that have taken place, the departments that were engaged are development services, of course. There's both planning as well as the buildings department, engineering and public works, parks, recreation and culture, and corporate services. So I wanted to kind of highlight, there's definitely one of the kind of key inputs that were recognized is and we'll go into this a little bit more, but because of the ambiguity about what is it municipalities have the right to mandate and what they don't have the right to mandate, and what does Bill 17 and Bill 23 mean to the mandating of metrics within green development standards, there was a lot of mention about the need to provide some form of incentives. Now, definitely, of course, the incentives that the development community often brings to our attention is financial incentives, development charge rebates as well. But there are many other incentives outside of just the financials on there that can be explored. And I will admit that while Toronto does give an incentive of a development charge rebate, None of the other municipalities with green standards also have that development charge rebate in place thus far. There are a number of municipalities, because of the provincial ambiguity, have been moving towards exploring how they bring incentives more into their green standards as well. So that's something that we did hear from the staff that was we considered that they really wanted to drive increased uptake, and then the role that incentives can play in that. Other incentives that are that you can be used, certainly from the perspective of accelerated permitting, accelerated approval processes, or combined consultation across different departments. Both of those were identified as very valuable to the development community in many of the consultations that have taken place in the past. So there's a variety of different ones. Another kind of an incentive, and it only works in Part 3 buildings, doesn't quite work in Part 9 buildings, that has been being used in a number of municipalities, is allowing, let's say, for example, they no longer need the roof space for mechanical systems, and allowing that space to be reused as saleable penthouse suites, which would offset, which provides a financial incentive to the developer, also provides a financial incentive to the municipality because it's probably going to be a higher value property, and as such, taxes will be increased on that one as well. So that's a win-win incentive that is being used in place because allowing additional height, not additional height, because it's just repurposing of approved height to usable space or saleable space. So those are some examples of that as well. There was definitely a lot of questions on legislative uncertainty and what Bill 23 means Bill 60 means Bill 17 and Bill 60 mean in terms of green standards. So I don't really have an answer, and we'll dig into that a little bit dig onto that one yet on what it means, but I think one of the key critical things that we heard from people in terms of what they wanted this update to achieve was more clarity on the effect, on how well is this Thinking Green development standard working? What's the uptake that we're getting as a result of it? That is something that people really did highlight as something that's really important to them. There were identified some issues with regards to enforcement gap. Building departments tend to see their responsibilities simply as verifying the Ontario Building Code. This is not just the case only in East Gwillimbury. This is the case across all municipalities with green standards. And we've done a lot of consultations with building departments to try and understand that perspective. And I think it really kind of stems from the Ontario Building Code being their requirement. In addition, I also wanted to highlight that the building code was created not for energy efficiency, but to make sure buildings don't kill people. And that liability component is something that the building code officials really hold dear, as they should. And I think that because of that liability aspect, they didn't see it as their responsibility for verifying outside of Ontario Building Code. I should also mention that there's, in terms of the verification from building departments all across municipalities, there's also not a lot of verification of the energy efficiency requirements in the Ontario Building Code at present. Often it's an attestation that is accepted as that. There's sometimes some developers using a blower door test on one of the units in the development that provide the replication of what that means to all the buildings in the development. So there is still some challenges in terms of how we verify it. I will also say it's very hard to ensure performance of a building that is unoccupied, and so it really means we need to move towards energy disclosure as the mechanism for that verification over the longer term. In terms of the maintenance risk, there's definitely some issues in particular, let's say, for example, on low-impact development. How is it going to be maintained over long term? Is it going to be making sure that these maintenance issues are taking place in order for us to achieve the hoped-for outcome of these metrics in the first place? And then the flexibility, again, municipalities don't really care how these performance goals are achieved. They just want the performance goals achieved. They welcome flexibility and often creativity in how these metrics are achieved. So that was another kind of key item that was raised by staff as well. We need to be flexible and identify what is our real goal. It's the outcome. How it's achieved isn't terribly important as well to us as much. And next slide, please. So, provincial legislation, where do we find ourselves at present? I will be kind of saying we still don't know where we find ourselves at present. There is still ambiguity on municipal green standard authorities, municipality. Like right now, there's been no changes to the Planning Act. There's no changes to the Municipal Act. There's been nothing that actually changes anything. The bills have passed, yes, but they haven't been implemented in a manner that actually changes decision-making and authorities on the part of a municipality. So I did want to highlight, because we have been seeing in some communities, when these conversations on green standards coming up, we have seen some deputations come forward saying that municipalities don't have the right to advance voluntary green standards. And there's parts of you that like, where did that come from? So I just wanted to clarify on that one. There's still a lot of ambiguity on this one. We will probably find out a little bit more information starting in March at some point in time when the provincial government comes back into session. But right now, there is still this kind of umbrella or Eeyore cloud, I think, highlighting how are municipal green standard authorities going to be impacted by this. I think one of the most critical parts of this, I was kind of like recommending as part of the consultations that we've been doing, is that really the municipalities need to be thinking about themselves. What is it that they want their green development standard to achieve? And as part of that, sending that message to the province that municipalities consider green standards to be important to them is something that's really important. And I think the update of East Gwillimbury's Thinking Green Development Standard is really critical for sending that message to the province that green standards are important to municipalities. They desire to have the outcomes that green standards are meant to achieve. And if we are going to be undermining the effectiveness of green standards, is there other ways we can achieve the hope for outcomes in a way that actually achieves the goals of the municipality had in the goals the municipality had in the first place? So that is really one of the kind of things. It is ambiguous at this stage. We do not know how much green standard authorities are going to be undermined. We don't have that information, but we really want to kind of still carry forward and do the consultations and hoping that, as an update on the Thinking Green Development Standard, obviously we'll have to adhere to provincial standards upon implementation, but sending the message to the province that green standards are important to a municipality is also an important message to send as well. And then would bring East Gwillimbury into the position where they would be able to communicate and hopefully engage with the province on figuring out, if not this, then what. Next slide, please. So we are going to be carrying on our work on the Thinking Green Development Standard. We're going to be moving on into public consultations with the development community as well as with other municipalities and other stakeholders as well, and coming back to report back on what we find in terms of legislative updates when we have those updates, as well as what we hear from the consultations in the public on the next steps. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Questions? Councillor Hay, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Through you, Madam Mayor. This is an excellent presentation, and I'm hoping it was great to hear about how East Gwillimbury has been a leader in advancing the standards for the environment and the climate since 2006. And so we should be very proud of that fact, as well as the fact that we actually won an award with the Home Energy Rating System H2O Award for conserving over 20% more water than traditional homes in the Discovery Home right here in Mount Albert on Center Street with Averton Development. So I don't think many people are aware of how dedicated and committed East Gwillimbury is to thinking green. And so my question is with regard to something that you just referenced quickly. It's about energy disclosure mechanisms and verifications. Would you please share a few more details about what those mechanisms are and how it works?
Through the mayor, thank you very much for your question. what that is looking at is, like, at present, how municipalities are verifying the energy and emissions metric in their green standard is through an energy modeling report. So it takes the developer works with their energy modeler to identify all the energy needs that the building is going to have, and that performs into an energy modeling report. That is what municipalities are using to identify adherence to the energy and emissions metric. And so that's the energy modeling report, but it's a modeled report that is being used. And when the actual building permit occupation permit is being given, there isn't verification that it's actually achieving those standards. The main reason why that is the case is because it's very, very hard to verify that on an unoccupied building. So you really need at least a year's worth of data to actually assure that it actually is achieving that goal. So one of the mechanisms that municipalities are using to identify that longer-term adherence to the green standard metric is energy disclosure, where the energy use of that building is disclosed. The province has one, the EWRB process, that's for larger buildings, but it can be used for any size building.
Thank you.
Councillor Johns?
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. And through you, I absolutely love some of the spirit in which you delivered your presentation, and where you spoke about the provincial regulations and looking to understand. You made a comment about focusing on outcomes and what we can deliver in focusing on outcomes. And I recognize that there are things that we have to wait on with the province to be able to enact. And so I think about what we can do as a municipal, from a municipal level, to go out and achieve an income, the outcome, versus kind of what is the path that we need to follow that might land on the similar income, or outcome, sorry, I should say. Within agreements, it was previously written in that new housing developments had to receive a recycling bin. Okay, so what could that look like with a different outcome? Well, one of the things that could be is do new developments, they need to deliver rainwater barrel collectors. And so not necessarily written into provincial legislation, but it is something that could help achieve runoff and then into infrastructure and extend the life of our assets and infrastructure. You could look at French drains on the streets, and then also if we are going through a parking review and we are looking at allowing or permitting the extended driveways, perhaps those additional driveways, perhaps they are permeable. If you look within Europe and different other countries, permeable parking is very, very common. And so I think that your comment about looking how we can achieve outcomes outside of provincial regulation, I am hearing that loud and clear, and I think the opportunity is, what are those grassroots things that we can deliver at our doorstep for residents that help achieve the macro goals of the municipality should be on the table for our discussion. So thank you very much for your presentation today.
Thank you.
Councillor Roy DeClemente, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to our presenter, thank you for your energy and your enthusiasm for the subject matter. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more about the transition from sort of the points-based to the tiered system. One of the frustrations that I've often found with our previous iteration was that when we had optional points, the community tended to sort of lean towards the low-hanging fruit. So they would go to the drought-tolerant perennial plantings of the Stella d'Oro daylilies, or they would throw a couple of extra bike racks in, and not necessarily really delve into the goals of rainwater harvesting or geothermal or electric vehicle charging ready or solar panel ready, those sorts of things. So can you speak to how we might be able to achieve some of those goals through this new system? Like, what's that decision that you've come to go to the tiers versus the points? Thank you.
Thank you for your question through the mayor. That exactly the challenges associated with the lack of control municipalities had on what uptake they were getting for what metrics. And upon evaluation of the point-based system that many municipalities did, they were finding they weren't getting the uptake on the metrics that were most important to them. So there were a couple of different strategies that they were using to try and address that. One, putting the higher points, increasing the amount of points and making higher points on certain metrics that they absolutely wanted to get uptake on. So that was one mechanism that was being used by municipalities. One of the things for why they moved from that kind of approach in terms of a leading practice of the tiered, the mandatory tiered approach, is because they were finding a lot of times the challenges of tracking of individual metrics point-based system was far more challenging to track than it was when you have a mandatory tiered system, where there's a lot more clarity on what is getting uptake and what is not getting uptake. So that was one of the areas. And again, it was just a results-based evaluation. They were just getting much more significant uptake on the metrics that were really important to them because they were mandated.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, one of the other suggestions that I might like to put forward is also to consider the Thinking Green development standards in the context of our allocation policy, and ensuring that we've talked about what applications merit the assignment of allocation when it's such a precious resource, and maybe because we as you've mentioned, we have a lot of uncertainty about legislation, but we can certainly express what is important to us, what our values are, and use our influence rather than our authority, I guess, is the best way of putting it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Leahy, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much through you, Madam Mayor. As my fellow councillor was speaking, and she referred to rainwater harvesting, I would like to have, if possible, an update from our staff member, or Chris Ross, if she's available to tell us a little bit more about how, in conjunction with the report, unless she's going to make her own report, what the initiatives are that we are pursuing in East Gwillimbury with regard to achieving those goals with or without certainty on a provincial level. And for example, in the past, I brought up on an occasion about rainwater barrels, and I believe the municipality of Aurora was selling rainwater barrels, and so I would be encouraging initiatives like that. So in terms of, for example, if residents come in to buy extra garbage tags, they also had the opportunity to buy rainwater barrels or other perhaps ways of tools or ways of equipment to also participate in the Thinking Green agenda moving forward. So I'm wondering if our staff could speak to the current projects that they're working on or initiatives that are in the pipes right now. Madam Mayor, thank you.
General Manager Gandhi, could you shed some light on this?
Actually, yes, Madam Mayor, I'll ask Chris Ross, who's available online, to respond to that question. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Through you, Madam Mayor, to Councillor Susan Leahy. The information about the rain harvesting options is included in the water usage memo that Council will receive in the next Council information package. I think it's scheduled for January 30th. In the meantime, we are continue exploring options to what to do with or what are the alternatives and the best case for East Gwillimbury in terms of water harvesting for new developments and existing homes. The Thinking Green Development Standards, this iteration that we are updating right now, includes some water harvesting already. And the updated standards are going to include rainwater harvesting as well as part of the metrics. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. I look forward to that more information coming on January 30th as well about specifics. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions at this time? I'm not seeing any. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please?
Happy to move, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Johns and Councillor Leahy. All in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much. We are now on item F, the confirming bylaw. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Foster, Councillor Johns. Be it resolved that bylaw 2026-007, being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the special meeting of Municipal Council held on January 20th, 2026, be taken as read and acted and signed by the mayor and municipal clerk. All in favor? And that's carried. And we are at item G for our agenda, adjournment. Thank you. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Roy DiClemente, Councillor Johns. Be it resolved that the special meeting of Municipal Council adjourn at 11:10 a.m. All those in favor? And that's carried. Thank you very much.